Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. American women have come a long way since the 1960s, when most middle and upper level jobs in journalism, business, academia, and the military were pretty much closed to them. Now, it seems that every day we're learning about women who have reached the top echelons of the business world, whether it's Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook, Carly Fiorina, former CEO of Hewlett-Packard and a former Republican presidential candidate, or many other women who are heading companies ranging from small tech companies to those in the Fortune 500. How did they get there, and what's it like trying to stay there? For her new book, Joann Lublin, the management news editor of the Wall Street Journal, interviewed 52 women corporate leaders, many of them present or former CEOs, and their stories offer lessons for other women who have dreamed of or who may not even have considered becoming corporate leaders. Earning It, Hard-Won Lessons from Trailblazing Women at the Top of the Business World, has just been published by the Harper Business imprint of HarperCollins. Welcome. Now, first of all, I have to ask you, what does the management editor of the Wall Street Journal do?
Well, I'm the management news editor, and I both cover and help coordinate our coverage of management issues.
Okay.
Everything ranging from executive pay to succession planning, corporate governance, do a lot of reporting involving takeovers because there are some management issues obviously involved with that.
Okay.
I also do a career advice column separate from that.
Okay, okay. So why did you write this book?
I wrote this book for two reasons. One, because I'd been writing a lot about management issues for the Journal for a long time and had met and written about several of these women who I ended up writing about for the book. But more importantly, I wanted to give back to our daughter who was entering the workforce and I thought had a somewhat rosy-eyed view as to what to expect. And so back in 2008, I wrote a first-person essay for a Wall Street Journal blog called Journal Women, called Remember the Barriers, in which I talked about some of my early experiences as a journalist at the Wall Street Journal, and ways in which I hadn't expected to be treated differently because I was a woman.
So what do the numbers show about the movement of women into the upper levels of business management, say, since the 60s? What do the numbers show?
Well, the numbers show that women in large numbers are getting out of college. In fact, I believe there are more undergraduate degrees now being granted to women than men. They're certainly a near majority of the American workforce. But what happens is when we get to upper management, and particularly the CEO spot, the corner office, the numbers are much, much smaller. But on the positive side, the number of women entering senior management is starting to finally get to be significant.
So when did this upward movement start? I mean, what caused it to start? Was it the 60s? I mean, you mentioned in the book, the women's movement, I would think, played a factor. You mentioned the birth control pill.
Absolutely.
Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and there was another law, was it equal employment?
Yeah, there's an equal pay law too.
Right, right. Sort of nudged more women upward or more into the workforce?
More into the workforce and to stay in the workforce after having children.
If we look at women first making it into the very top levels of corporate management, I don't know who the first ones were. Do you know who they were, the first CEOs?
Well, Katherine Graham was the very first female CEO to get in the Fortune 500. She acquired that
Head of the Washington Post.
Yes,
okay.
Due to the death of her husband, which has been in journalism a way that many women have become publishers. Husband died and then the widow took over running the newspaper.
Right. But you say the numbers have stalled.
Well, I think the number of women CEOs is not as great as many of us had hoped we would see by now, but it is starting to pick up. There are more than 24 women CEOs of Fortune 500 companies now. But where I take the most hope from is the level right below that. The women who are direct reports to the CEO, whether it's men or women. Wall Street Journal does a special report every year called Women in the Workplace, which is based on a large-scale survey. Our latest report, which came out last September, found that about 19% of the most senior executives are now female, and that was up from 17% the year before. So now you're getting close to 1 in 5 senior level jobs being held by women. Again, not a huge number, just like the number of CEOs. But to the extent that women are not only in those jobs, but serving as role models for women at mid-management, that to me is a really critical development.
It was interesting to me that, you know, while some of the women you wrote about in your book had pursued typical liberal arts degrees, music, theater, whatever, but the majors that I seem to see over and over again were computer science, engineering, chemistry,
and math.
And math. So that sort of suggests that women who are in the STEM areas, in those disciplines, that those are the companies where women are meeting a lot of success or more success.
One would hope. Unfortunately, the Labor Department statistics suggest that enrollment in STEM majors for women has been dropping. After going up for a very long time, it's been on the decline in recent years.
Any idea why that is?
Not real clear why, except that, again, studies that are done of women who then enter STEM fields find a fairly high dropout rate at mid-career. Now, is that because of pull or push? In other words, do they want to go do something else, or do they feel frustrated at where their chances are for advancement in their particular field or their particular industry? I'm not sure anyone has the exact answer to that question.
Okay. Well, let's look at some of the themes that the book explores. The whole issue of getting in the door, how you get on your way. What were some of the lessons from your subjects?
Well, I think at the end of the day, a lot of these women found it difficult to break in to their first professional level job, either because they didn't have a technical or engineering background and were trying to get into that area, or had no business training, they were liberal arts majors, or they were just running up against old-fashioned gender bias. And what was amazing about a number of these women that I talked to is they didn't take their setbacks as being the be-all, end-all of their lives. And that was the underlying theme of the book. How did these women deal with setbacks, both personal and professional, and become better leaders because of that? And in terms of getting started, it meant in some cases being hugely persistent and not taking no for an answer and finding out ways to get around the obstacle or get somebody to open a door for them.
Which takes us to Bloom Where You Are Planted. Tell us about that.
That's a story involving Andrea Jung, who goes on to become the first woman CEO of Avon Products, a company which throughout its history has overwhelmingly served women and has overwhelmingly had women as their independent sales reps. She starts out her career in her 20s working right here in New York for Bloomingdale's at their flagship store. She thinks she's really kind of God's gift to humanity. She's been very successful as a buyer and has worked very well in their swimsuit department and raises her hand for a promotion. And she gets turned down. She's in her mid-20s and she can't figure out why this has happened. At that point, Marvin Traub, who's this larger-than-life character in the retail world and the head of Bloomingdale's, summons her to his office at the top floor of Bloomingdale's and tells her he has a different idea in mind for her. This, again, it's going to be her very first supervisory level position. And he wants her to take over the lingerie department. Now, this is the 80s, and the lingerie department is the backwater at Bloomingdale's, as symbolized by the fact that it's housed in the sub-basement, right next to the subway station, where you get all day long to listen to the subway cars. It's been run by a man forever. All the people that work there are men who are far older than Andrea, who's in her 20s.
And all the lingerie is beige, basically.
It's beige or white, right. And she wisely asks him for some time to think about this and decides that, you know, maybe doing something that's totally outside her realm of knowledge, where she could actually learn something as well as prove that she had the right stuff, might not be such a bad idea. And so she accepts the job. And on her first day, as she's going down, 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 headed toward the sub-basement, she remembers a poster she had seen in the Human Resources office. And it was a picture of a pot with a flowering plant coming out of it. And the headline was, "Bloom where you are planted." And so she does. She introduces this radical idea of selling lingerie in colors. Oh my gosh, perish the thought, rather than beige and white. And of course, it's a huge success.
And she wound up
leaving Bloomingdale's a few years later to get a pretty high-level position, middle management, albeit, at Avon, where once again she takes on some roles that involve sort of sticking out and blooming not just where she's planted, but doing something that was really challenging.
A lot of women, you know, trying to work their way up, dealt with a lot of hostility. Certainly dealt with hostility from male colleagues. Talk about that.
Well, I think, frankly, it is something that hasn't disappeared even today. It just, frankly, takes on more subtle forms. I was doing a presentation about the book to some of my colleagues at Dow Jones, and one young woman, a millennial, raised her hand and said, "What would you say if your editor said, I want you to use all your feminine wiles to get that source to cooperate?" First of all, there was a gasp in the audience, and I said, "When did that question get raised? 10 years ago, 15 years ago?" She said, "No, last week." And so dealing with hostility or less than tolerant male colleagues, whether it's a boss or a subordinate, is something a number of these women dealt with. And at the end of the day, they were able to be successful, particularly as managers of male subordinates, by essentially being empathetic and by essentially trying to make it clear that I'm in this to make you successful, because to the extent you succeed, I will be successful.
I know you talked about one woman who met with a mid-level manager who was just hostile towards her from the beginning. And she decided, I mean, he was just almost apoplectic, and she decided that she was going to help him reach the next level, and his attitude about her changed radically.
And that was Chalice Lowe, the only African-American woman I interviewed for the book, and was at a very young age made an officer at a major bank in Chicago. And one of the people she was then supervising was the guy who had trained her to be qualified for that role, and who had worked for this bank for 20 years and felt he deserved that promotion. So not only had he never worked for a woman before, he'd never worked for a black woman, and he resented the fact that she got the promotion that he wanted. And she said to him, "I will work with you to make sure that you get to be an officer, but, you know, is that something you really want to do?" And his attitude changed. But it was clear to her that he didn't have the experience that they needed and wanted to see, because he'd been a training role. He hadn't been in any kind of supervisory role. So she gave him his own team, and within a year, he was made an officer.
We're going to take a short break. Then we'll be back with more with Joann Lublin, author of Earning It, Hard-Won Lessons from Trailblazing Women at the Top of the Business World, after this message. Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with Joann Lublin, author of Earning It, Hard-Won Lessons from Trailblazing Women at the Top of the Business World. It's just been published by the Harper Business imprint of HarperCollins. So if a woman wants to make it to the top of a corporate entity, does she have to become one of the boys?
That's a really good question. I think at one point in our history as a country, it probably didn't hurt to be, quote, one of the boys. But I think, if anything, what became very clear from talking to many of these women is, at the end of the day, you have to be true to your authentic self. And that means being whoever it is that you are. And for many of them, it meant being a woman in all respects. And in some cases, that meant you didn't act like the guys. There were some women who felt that that was the only way, however, that they could accept it. They drove a fast car, they drank a lot, they swore a lot, and early in their careers, talk sports, and early in their careers, it did make a difference, at least at cracking the ice. But in terms of being leaders, women have certain strengths that are more common than we see in men, and it's great to take advantage of those strengths. And one of those, I think, is empathy. There are many, many male empathetic leaders, but I think women can be extremely empathetic, but at the same time, you got to be decisive.
Right. As we've learned recently from Fox News, but also from a lot of other places, sexual harassment and sexual stereotyping is still very much alive. How did the women that you talked to deal with that?
Some of them dealt with it pretty well, and some of them wish they had dealt with it differently. It all kind of depended on where they were in their career, whether they felt there were resources that they could turn to, whether there were other women that they could talk to. And what, again, I found very impressive by a number of these women was their willingness, after they had earned it, to return it. And so when they got into positions of power and either were made aware of sexual harassment or themselves became exposed to sexual harassment again, then they could be in a position to do something about it. And in some cases that meant, in the example, for instance, of Penny Hersher, who was at that point the CEO of a startup, a woman in her 20s who worked for her was being pushed by a corporate client to date him, and she didn't want to do it. But she was afraid to say no for fear of costing this client to a startup that really needed every corporate customer they could get.
So what did she do?
Well, she had initially gone to her boss, and then the young woman came to Penny, the CEO. And Penny herself, early in her career, had been sexually harassed, and when complained about it to her boss, was told to essentially ignore it. She later, with her boss, went through some mandated training and discovered that that wasn't how they were supposed to deal with it, but they didn't know at the time. So fast forward to 2015, when this situation arose, she asked the young woman if she was romantically involved personally with, a relationship outside of this one that the corporate client was trying to promote, and she said yes. And she said, I suggest you simply say to him, I am not interested, I am romantically involved, and if that doesn't get him to stop bothering you, I will intervene. And the CEO made it real clear she was willing to sacrifice the business relationship. That's critical.
Yeah. Unequal pay and unequal advancement. I think most women have encountered this. One thing I noticed in my career as a journalist is that women will complain about being overlooked for a job, will complain about being what they feel is underpaid. But when you ask them, well, did you ask for the job? Did you ask for the raise? They didn't. And, the message to me is you have to ask for what you want. If you don't get it, then you have to come with a different strategy, but you certainly have to ask for it.
Absolutely, and that's a very powerful theme to the chapter I wrote about the pay gap, the gender pay gap. And essentially the message there is, if you don't ask, you don't get. And time again, these women noticed when they were trying to promote women that women didn't feel that they were qualified for a position, even when they were asking male subordinates who were equally unqualified whether they would accept a promotion, or women did not negotiate very well when it came to pay raises. A number of these women figured out early on that if you don't ask, you don't get. And you've got to not just ask, but you have to ask from a position of knowledge, because knowledge is power. If you know how valued you are by a workplace, particularly when it comes to a promotion, then you've got some leverage, I quoted one woman as saying.
And you also have to keep asking sometimes.
Absolutely.
Wear them down. Work-life balance has gotten a lot of press over the years, almost to the extent that I'm kind of tired of hearing about it. But the answer seems to be, how can women worry about how can they balance family with work? I mean, the answer just sort of seems to be that you have to work it out the best way you can.
Absolutely.
It helps to have a supportive husband. It helps to have a supportive boss. It helps to have,
a well-paid nanny.
A well-paid, absolutely. Sometimes in a commuting relationship, the two of you are commuting, between different cities. But you just have to figure it out the best way you can. You have to decide what your priorities are and figure it out that way.
And you have to recognize there is no such thing as balance.
Right.
That's why the title of that chapter is "Manager Moms Are Not Acrobats." If they were, then they would be able to balance.
Who were some of the women that you interviewed a lot of women, who were some of them that most impressed you or that you admired the most?
Well, to this very point, I think Mindy Grossman impressed me quite a bit. She has been the CEO in recent years of HSN, Home Shopping Network. She's about to become CEO of Weight Watchers. And at what point in her career, she has a young child, a husband with a pretty demanding career here in New York. She's in the fashion business, and she's offered a very large job at Nike, for which she ought to relocate. She decides that she's going to become a commuter mom. But before she accepts this position, running all their women's apparel business, a huge responsibility, she has a very important conversation, not just with her husband, but with their nanny, because she wants to make sure that this is going to work to be a commuter parent. And frankly, I don't think she would have taken the job if the nanny wasn't willing on occasion to stay overnight, if her husband had to go out of town, or come very early in the morning before he had to go off to some early meeting. And she ends up keeping the same nanny until her daughter goes off to college.
Wow.
Completely.
Wow. What did you learn that surprised you?
One of the things I learned that surprised me was the fact that at least a half a dozen of these women, again to this issue of work-life balance, had husbands who chose to be stay-at-home dads. And I guess, first of all, I was surprised that more than half were even working moms, but then within that group that there were a number whose husbands volunteered to do this. It wasn't the wife saying, you know, I've got the better paying job or the better prospects. It was the man recognizing this and deciding to do that. In the case of one woman where she got a promotion just before the birth of their second child, her husband, while she's on maternity leave, says, I want to stay home and raise our kids. Later, she was on a panel with me after the book came out, and I said to her, looking back, she's now been a public company CEO twice, and she's running Ulta at the moment. What would you think have happened differently in terms of your professional career if he had not chosen to stay home when he did? And I thought she would have said, I wouldn't have been a public company CEO once, much less twice. But instead she said, well, I wouldn't have gone to 4. I would have stopped after 2 kids.
Ah, okay. The main lesson of the book seems to be, don't give up when things get tough.
Not only don't give up when things get tough, but anticipate the fact that
things are going to be tough.
Things are going to get tough. That's what life is like for men and women alike. And the point here is to develop resilience early in your career by taking Mission Impossible or calculated risks in terms of the assignments that you pursue, places where you can sort of stretch your wings and figure out how you deal with perhaps smaller scale setbacks, and that then inoculates you and prepares you for when the bigger bombs drop in your life.
Men don't seem to have a problem with taking jobs that they don't really feel they're prepared for. They say, I can do that.
They do.
I can do that.
Because a lot of them have greater self-confidence, perhaps, than women. But a lot of women are learning how to develop self-confidence, and hopefully more will from reading the book.
Mm-hmm. Were there things, you talk a lot about your own career path, you know, in your book, but were there things you wish you had known when you were working your way up as a journalist that you now know?
Well, one of the things I wish I had known was the importance of taking some time to make decisions and not answering in the moment. So when I was in my late 20s, I was offered the opportunity about becoming a bureau chief at the Wall Street Journal, at which point I had not had any children. I was married. We were thinking about having a child at some point. There were no role models. There was no woman who had ever been a bureau chief at the Wall Street Journal. And my husband was very committed to his career at Businessweek. And so when this was raised as a possibility, my knee-jerk reaction was, someday yes, but not now, rather than saying, can I have a day or two to think about this and come back to you to consider what are the upsides and downsides? What are ways where I could perhaps have found out what were some ways to make it work? So, you know, what I like to say is I wish I had had this book when I was in my 20s. It would have been very useful.
So you might have accepted the bureau chief's job, possibly?
If I had taken some time to talk to my husband about it rather than on the spot saying, not now, maybe later.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. you have about 15 seconds to give young people advice, those who aspire to be CEOs one day. Maybe a bit more than 15 seconds.
Well, not everybody has to want to be a CEO one day, but I think everybody has to want to be the best they possibly can in their careers. And I think the best piece of advice I would give to anybody like that is don't listen to that naysayer voice in your head, that imposter syndrome that says, you don't belong here, you don't deserve this, you didn't earn it. Guess what? There's plenty of evidence, I'm sure, at some point in your career that you do belong and you did earn it.
Well, there are a lot of interesting stories that can teach us a lot in this book. So, thank you for that. We're out of time. Again, I want to thank Joann Lublin for joining me. Earning It, Hard-Won Lessons from Trailblazing Women at the Top of the Business World. It's just been published by the Harper Business imprint of HarperCollins. For the City University of New York and One to One, I'm Sheryl McCarthy. If there are any people you'd like to hear from or topics you'd like us to explore, please let us know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.